I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for finding me. Now, 25,000 ambulance workers have walked out in the first of 2 one-day strikes. Health Secretary Steve Barclay is telling you to take extra care because his emergency services will not cover all 999 calls. Will you be being more careful today? Let me know. I'll be discussing the day's most interesting news stories as well this morning with my expert debaters, the co-founder of the Together Declaration, Alan Miller, and the former president of the Law Society, Stephanie Boyce. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 10. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. An emergency Cobra meeting is being held as thousands of ambulance workers walk off the job.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
Ministers are addressing the growing discontent as fresh strikes across various sectors threaten to grind the country to a halt. With the health services in England and Wales under severe pressure today, the government's urging the public to be cautious. The Health Secretary has criticised unions for failing to give exemptions to ensure all life-threatening and emergency calls are covered. Steve Barclay says minimum service levels could be introduced in future to guarantee patient safety.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the exemptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
Well, hundreds of members of the armed forces have been drafted into cover for the striking ambulance workers, taking non-urgent patients to and from hospital. However, they're not allowed to drive through red lights, turn on ambulances, blue lights or treat patients. Former SAS soldier Phil Campion told GB News the Army is used to stepping in when there's industrial action.
My first ever job in the military, right, we went down to West Glamorgan in those Green Goddess fire engines and we stood in for a fire service which were on strike, OK? The bin strike, squaddies turned out for that. All sorts of strikes we've stood in before. It's part and parcel of the job. It's what you signed up for. Like I say, defending the country comes in many ways, shapes and forms, and this is all part of the job.
Well, the Met Police Commissioner says the ambulance and nursing strikes are causing more work for his staff.
Too many of our tens of thousands of great officers are spending time on health and social care work. We're dealing with too much that other agencies should be dealing with, particularly mental health. And we've started conversations with NHS colleagues about how they take that work back from us. And that's really important because I need my great men and women to doing more for London in policing and not filling in behind other agencies.
Ukraine's president is due to arrive in Washington this afternoon for talks with Joe Biden, his first foreign trip since the start of the war in February. Volodymyr Zelensky will also address Congress and hold a number of meetings to help, in his words, strengthen Ukrainian resilience and defence capabilities. Earlier this week, the US confirmed a new package of military aid for the country worth £1.6 billion, including a Patriot missile air defence system. Controversial gender reforms are expected to pass in the Scottish Parliament today. The bill will remove the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is currently needed to receive a gender recognition certificate. It would also lower the minimum age for applicants to 16 and shorten the required time for people to live in their acquired gender from 2 years to 3 months. The bill has been one of the most controversial debated in Holyrood since devolution. Donald Trump's tax returns over a 6-year period will be made public, despite his long-running efforts to keep them secret. A committee in the US House of Representatives has voted to publish his returns between 2015 and 2021. That's before and during his time as president. It will bring to an end a 4.5-year battle by the Democrats to scrutinise Trump's tax affairs. Control of the US House will pass to the Republicans in January. Elon Musk says he'll step down as chief executive of Twitter as soon as he finds someone foolish enough to take the job. More than 57% of users who voted in a Twitter poll posted by Mr. Musk said he should quit. The Tesla and SpaceX boss says he still has plans to head the software and servers teams. And this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it is back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner today on GB News. Here's what's coming up on the show today. We're talking about the fact that 25,000 ambulance workers have walked out this morning in the first of 2 one-day strikes. Health Secretary Steve Barclay is telling you to take extra care today, warning that NHS plans won't cover all 999 calls. 750 armed forces personnel have been drawn in to help, and we're being told to be extra careful as resources are stretched. Are you worried? Let me know. And I'll be joined by the reality TV star Jake Quickenden. He'll give his tips on how to deal with grief at Christmas after losing his father and his brother. For many of us, of course, it is a time of celebration, but if you have lost a loved one, the festive period is a really tough time. And on my panel this morning, I'll be joined by the co-founder of the Together Declaration, Alan Miller, and the immediate past president of the Law Society of England and Wales, Stephanie Boyce. And of course, this show is much improved with your input. Don't forget, we've got a poll running this morning on Twitter. We are asking you, due to the strikes, will you change your behaviour this Christmas as you are being advised? So far, 88% of you, I believe, are saying that you will not because you are a stubborn lot. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews to have your say. So thousands of ambulance workers have walked out on their first of 2 days of strike action. An emergency COBRA meeting is being held by the government as the emergency workers walk off the job, with the health service under severe pressure today. The government is now telling you to be extra cautious over the Christmas period. Lucy Johnson, Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, joins me now. Good morning, Lucy. It's rather unprecedented, I think, isn't it, for the Health Department? We had Wills Quinn, Health Junior Minister in the Department of Health, telling people don't do anything risky. Don't take any risky activities. Given that we've had 2 years, Lucy, of these disruptive COVID Christmases, what do you think? Is it appropriate, first of all, to say that we should all be taking more care over the Christmas period?
I think it's a sign of absolute desperation, isn't it? And, you know, there's a deadlock in the negotiations. Both sides are digging their heels in and no one's prepared to sort of budge an inch, which is really sad that it's come to this. And it feels like there could be more that Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, could do to try and open up negotiations. It shouldn't be left to the public to try and curb their behaviour just in case of an accident. So, yeah, it does seem inappropriate. Having said that, sorry, carry on.
No, go on, Lucy, carry on.
No, having said that, I'm talking to ambulance workers and paramedics on the ground, and one of their frustrations is that a lot of people do call the services 999 and 111 with non-critical problems. We've had the concern over group strep A, and that's sort of crashed the system rather, with a lot of parents with kids with sore throats, calling the services. And they're just overwhelmed. I think about half of 111 calls are being abandoned now. So it's not just crumbling; it's collapsing, really.
Isn't that interesting? That I think there probably is some education to be done around the necessity for 999 and ambulance calls, and when, particularly as parents, when you call them and when you don't. We've got the 111 system as well, Lucy. Do you think there's going to be a lot of confusion for people over this Christmas period as to what we do in the event of an emergency? These strikes only make that more difficult.
I think in many cases there isn't anything. People can't get hold of 111. They can't get hold of the services they need. And even when they can, the 111 algorithm can often wrongly put people in a higher category call out because they're not trained doctors, so they can't ask appropriate questions. So people are being put into category 1 and 2 cases when they're not. So I think it's a huge worry. And only just hours ago, we heard the story of a 93-year-old woman who was left 25 hours screaming in pain, having broken her hip in a care home and fallen. So people will die. Lives will be lost.
Mm. Do you see any way out of this strike, Lucy, as the health editor, between the ambulance workers particularly? We talked about the nurses a bit yesterday, we talked about the trains as well. But the ambulance service is so crucial. This seems like such an obvious thing to say. I can't believe in 2022 we're having to point out the fact that ambulances are a really integral part of the health service. And I wonder whether the resolution will be found in the new year and what that could possibly look like.
Well, one of the reasons, they say that it's about pay, but actually, if you talk to ambulance crew and indeed nurses, one of their main problems is actually they just don't feel looked after. They don't feel cared for, and they don't feel properly respected. I know we all clapped for the health service, but, small things could make a difference in terms of perks of the job and giving them, opportunities, for example, just to park free in the hospital.
Yeah. Oh, I think we've lost Lucy there. That was Lucy Johnson, Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Let's speak now to our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, who's at a picket line in Nottingham for us today. Good morning, Will. Good morning. Now, have you also been talking to the paramedics, the ambulance drivers down there? What have they been saying to you, Will?
Yeah, it's really bright. The sun's just come out, but you can probably see behind me that there is a picket line where there's a number of people that have been waving flags, particularly for the GMB union, because that's the union that is on strike today. From East Midlands Ambulance Service, you're also going to hear a lot of people that are pipping their horns and tooting their horns, because where we are right now, it's just off of the ring road, so that's why the headquarters is here next to me, so that they can dart around Nottingham city centre quite easily if somebody does need an ambulance. Some of the conversations that I've been having with people here today are quite they're quite pertinent, because people are saying that they've been waiting 5 hours or so at a hospital just to drop somebody off. They've been saying that they've heard calls for backup, for assistance, and because they're stuck in queues, they can't go to it, and because of that, maybe people have lost their lives. So this is a really serious issue. It is very much about pay. It is very much about getting what ambulance workers would like, which is higher than 4%, which was the pay deal imposed by the independent body. And I've been hearing a few of those issues for the reasons why people are on strike, about pay, about conditions, from somebody called Sarah, who's an ambulance technician who's on the picket line behind me.
Ultimately, it's for the patients. People aren't getting an ambulance when they need to get an ambulance. Staff are leaving in droves. The conditions that we're working in, it's just not fair anymore to anybody involved. It needs to be more money involved because it needs to be attractive for people to come into the job and to retain people that we already have. We're losing long-serving staff because the conditions are just getting worse and people are tired, people are just finding it more difficult to continue with the level of work that we're having to deal with. It's just the reduction in all the funding from the social care outwards. The people aren't getting to wards. People are then blocking up A&E, making it difficult to hand patients over. We're seeing longer and longer delays at hospital, and the staff in hospital are burnt out. Everybody cannot continue as it is. It's just everything's covered by agency, which then creates problems because people don't know the systems, the IT systems, and everything else. Which puts more pressure on the people that are there as regular staff. If somebody really needs us, then we will be there, and that's the nature of the people working here today and the thoughts of everybody on the ambulance service, and that's why we do the job. Half the people here that are still here now have been working the night shift, but are here to support colleagues, and myself and my crewmate that are working today, we've agreed to attend Category 1 calls. And also if they come out and something's uncovered and they detail to us what it is, then absolutely we'll respond because we didn't come into this job to not help people.
Yes, well, it's probably easier to say the areas where there aren't strikes happening today than to try and pick out the ambulance strikes where they are, the trusts where there are strikes happening. There's no strikes happening in Northern Ireland, there's none in Scotland, there are strikes in Wales and every single ambulance trust in England except for the east of England. It's also worth noting that a number of hospital trusts like Nottingham University Hospitals declared critical incidents, as well as at least 5 ambulance trusts across the country have declared critical incidents because of the effect, the long-running effect of what's been going on inside of the NHS and different parts of the NHS, but also because of the worry around how these ambulance trusts may be affected during this really difficult period. East Midlands Ambulance Trust say that they estimate about 50% of their staff are on strike today, and while many calls will be answered, those life-threatening emergencies, you may be waiting for other calls. 111 is the way to go in those situations. Life-threatening situations, call 999 because somebody will be there to help you. I think as well, just on that point of support that we've been talking about, lots of people pipping their horns, but I just saw one gentleman come over from Lidl, which is just behind us, and he had a big tray of donuts for the strikers. So there is certainly a lot of support for the strikers and what they're doing, even if it is a really difficult decision from most people's perspectives.
OK, thank you, Will. Will Hollis there in Nottingham. I'm asking you on our Twitter poll today whether you will change your behaviour this Christmas due to the strikes. Lots of you getting in touch and giving me your comments on this. Daryl has said, no, I've still got an 11 a.m. skydiving session and deep sea diving at 2 p.m. Of course, it won't change anything because people have to go to work, unlike the strikers. And Sean has said, no danger, it is the spirit, why we love Christmas, why we live in this nanny state, that we should change our behaviour due to the strikes. And this gentleman said, yes, I've changed my behaviour, I've joined Bupa. This is part of the problem, isn't it? We're going to be sending a lot of people towards private healthcare with these strikes going on, and I think that could signal the demise of the NHS, and I think there's a lot of us who do not want that. Right, next up on today's show, I'm going to be joined by the co-founder of the Together Declaration, Alan Miller, and the immediate past president of the Law Society, Stephanie Boyce, to go through some of today's biggest stories, but time for a very short break. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. My guests are here this morning. I am so pleased to be joined by the former president of the Law Society of England and Wales, Stephanie Boyce. Morning, Steph. And Alan Miller is here from the Together Declaration, familiar face to GB News viewers. Right, we've just been talking about ambulance strikes, Alan. We're all being told we've got to be really careful over Christmas. I feel utterly patronised by that as a sentiment.
Absolutely. All of a sudden, we need to use our common sense. They're going to trust the public, are they, after 3 years of treating us and patronising us and not allowing us to exercise our judgment? I think, obviously, this is a number of different things going on with this discussion. I think that the first thing I would say is that, you know, 1 minute people are saying everyone should clap for people, and it's almost like the NHS is this deity, and the next thing we're presented as though there's really uncaring people that are trying to devastate society. And I think that frontline staff deserve and absolutely should have good pay. But it's not just about pay. It's also about the fact we know that we've had bed losses, we've had a lack of resource, we've had impacts in social care, loss of 40,000 care workers because of the jab mandate that shouldn't have happened. And then at the same time, we've seen in the last 2 years, execs, some of them get double and triple pay. Some people are on as much as 300,000. Well over 15% pay rises, some of them double what the Prime Minister is getting. So the question becomes, why is it that frontline staff that are under pressure are suddenly being demonised? And I think that it is going to impact people. Of course it is. I mean, that's one of the things that happen with strikes. We should also note that, like with the protests that people were doing, the government's response was to try and bring in new legislation to stop protests, like it has done with free speech. And like it's doing now with strikes. The right to withdraw your labour, which people take very seriously, should now not be new legislation that's coming in. And I think that what's interesting as well is that both Labour and the Conservatives have really come out and said they're not really backing people. But I think we have a common interest in saying that, you know, ordinary people who are doing really difficult work, absolutely. If we don't think that nurses and other frontline workers deserve to get this money, and also in the context of the proportion of what's paid on the NHS, we've got a much bigger thing to address, and we have to do it quickly, which is how are we organising the NHS? What about the bureaucracy and the levels of inefficiency? And let's not demonise staff, but actually get to grips with that.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts? One of our viewers, I mean, rather jokingly, when I said about changing their behaviour, they said, well, I've bought private healthcare, that's how I'm changing my behaviour. It feels like that move is becoming inevitable now, and I don't think most of the population in this country want that.
No, absolutely. The NHS is a national treasure. That's, you know, when Bevan created this NHS in 1948, it was on the premise that we would have healthcare when needed and when we needed it and at affordable. We shouldn't have to pay for it. And there are those who are opting out, and if they can self-fund, that's all good and well. But there are an enormous amount of the population who either are not in a position to self-fund or believe so much in the ideology of the NHS that they are committed to it. Absolutely, Alan is right. The NHS needs reforming. This is not just about pay. It's about so many different factors within the NHS. We should be, both sides of the government and the union bosses should be sat down across the table, because there are three parties in this dispute. The government, the union bosses, and of course the public, who encompass the taxpayers and patient care. And they should be sitting down to find a resolution, collaborating together as to how we reform this national treasure. So it does produce the workers that Alan spoke about, and it produces the pay that nurses, ambulance workers and so many others rightly deserve.
It feels like it's been neglected. I mean, I know that the events of the last 2 years have just thrown everything up in the air and it's all landed in very strange places. But this has really brought into focus, hasn't it, how little forward planning there has been for the vision of the NHS. I feel like there have been a lot of people around there, Alan, who are working around the NHS or working for drug companies who've done really, really well, who've profited out of the NHS with eye-watering figures, whilst patient care and care for the employees of the emergency services have been neglected. Is there one particular government we can pin this on? It feels like decades of neglect.
Well, I think that you have to go back a long way. But I just want to also say that the last 3 years where you had a COVID-only obsession and lockdowns, which has led to all sorts of things, additional pressures on top of stuff, and people with cancer and heart disease and stroke, which are increased in multitudes, has had an enormous impact. But actually, if you go back, the discussion about what should happen in the NHS, Labour under Tony Blair, the public-private partnership, there was a range of things that actually were an attempt to deal with things, but made things worse. And we spend more public money, even though some areas were privatised. And I think that, you know, if you look at A&E, if you look at people not being seen by GPs, if you look at the length, and it's way before this that people have been waiting in ambulances and there were backlogs, it's just not acceptable, and we need to get to grips. And I think the public should put pressure on the government, on their elected representatives and on the opposition to not come out with platitudes or to give some kind of signalling, but to actually say, we need to get to grips with this. It needs to be made efficient and executed. And we need to have a national discussion about if people are prepared to pay, because, of course, we are paying for this, all of us. It's the biggest employer in the world. We're paying for it out of our taxes. So are there other ways like they do in Europe where we can do things more efficiently? And let's have that conversation with everyone in the public.
Yeah, absolutely. We all deserve better. The workers deserve better. And we as taxpayers who are service users, we also deserve better. Right. Stephanie. Jeremy Clarkson got himself into lots of trouble for writing an article in the Sun newspaper, his usual comic style, but some say that he went too far in relation to Meghan Markle and his cellular dislike of her. 60 MPs have now written to the editor of The Sun condemning the column. Can't help but think they should have better things to do. And ITV are saying that he's going to carry on. Is it saying he's going to carry on? Yeah, he's going to keep his job at the moment of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Should he lose his job?
Well, I think, firstly, regardless of what you think about the Duchess of Sussex, and, you know, some people have said this is freedom of speech, some people have said this is hate speech. Let's be clear, what Jeremy Clarkson said, and has said previously, because this is not the first time he has said comments that have offended, his comments on this particular occasion were awful. And that was what the ITV bosses said. His comments were awful. People, in my view, people who occupy platforms of influence and hold, to a certain degree, a position of power, should be more considerate and thoughtful in the commentary that they put out in the public domain.
Well, Alan Miller, over to you, because I think, do you know what? They've taken the article off online. The Sun have taken the
Absolutely.
article down, so you can't actually read it now. I'm amazed that it got through the editor without him pointing out there's this one controversial scene that he writes about where he says that Meghan Markle should be paraded down the street naked while people throw excrement at her. He's referencing Game of Thrones.
But we only know that after he came out with a supposed
That's right.
statement.
And that's what I think is extraordinary, that the editor didn't say, we need to clarify that, because
Yes.
that sounds really quite bad. But still, I would defend his right to say mean things about people in public.
So there's a number of things that are going on here, and Stephanie's right that in the past he's also said some terrible things. He's actually said that striking workers should be shot and that truckers should kill prostitutes. He said all sorts of things that are really inflammatory, reprehensible, and, you know, killing people. And I don't particularly like what he says, and I don't like lots of things that lots of people say. I think to start imposing on him that he meant something about someone is someone else's interpretation. But where I'm really concerned, and where the power lies, because Stephanie was saying about people with power, is that when Caroline Noakes and 60 Conservative MPs and others start writing saying that this should be taken down, it's unacceptable, or when, you know, Chris Packham says that he should be put in jail, that we have a reaction to something that is so draconian, and the idea that who are the people that are going to judge and make decisions about what's acceptable? And
that's what we've got the courts for.
So well, that's right. So legal free speech, and we know that with the online safety bill, we've had a big fight at Together and many others, the Free Speech Union and others, citizens who've challenged legal but harmful. But we know that this government and others are petrified of the public speaking, because within all of this...
But isn't that why they're trying to
I just want to finish this point. This is really important. Within all of this, there's this idea that all these gammons and all these terrible white, like, working-class people somewhere are going to come out and start behaving in a certain way because you can't trust them. But these decent politicians and these Twitter reference people can do it. And finally, just to say that we've just seen on the Twitter files lots of free speech being suppressed.
Yeah.
So I'm very concerned with all that. I disliked what he said. I thought it was disgusting. I agree with his daughter, as it happens.
Yeah.
The bigger question is this whole pressure all the time to suffocate speech.
Go on, Steph.
All I was going to say is that I slightly disagree with Alan on that particular point about what the government is trying to do. We have seen the government attempt to introduce legislation via the Bill of Rights, which is now on hold or whatever it's doing, on a shelf somewhere, to try and do exactly that. And that is to increase the government's powers, to increase freedom of speech. The difficulty I have is in the current climate where we have seen women, and I'm going to focus on women, where we have seen women lose their lives and their liberty. We are seeing, yesterday, we heard stories internationally about women across the world who are increasingly losing their right, on this particular occasion, to education. But in this country, where women are petrified to walk the streets, they do not feel safe, that I do not think that commentary like this, from a person, as I say, who occupies, as it says, the most famous quiz on television, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? He's in a position of influence and power. He should know better. And I agree that editors should not have allowed this to come out in print.
He's also funny. He's a very funny writer. His books, he's not particularly funny on the telly.
Oh, right.
His writing is some of the most hilarious pieces of journalism we have. His columns are put into books. They are always a little surreal, so he takes it into quite a surreal and comic realm, which is why when he's depicting this image of a woman, Meghan Markle, walking down the street and being pelted with excrement, in the context of the article, it's surreal and it's funny. And I think that we have to be really careful not to confuse, because I totally agree with you, Stephanie, that women's safety is important, but those are two different issues, are they not?
Well, absolutely, they're two different issues. But if we take one of the other females who's mentioned in this article, Nicola Sturgeon, who's come out and very publicly and made comments. But also, the fact is that we only know it's a reference to a Game of Thrones. I've never seen the drama. But that's a fictional drama. But the way that he has portrayed it and relayed it is very real for lots of people, and we cannot ignore that.
And I also say that lots of men are being stabbed and having terrible things done to them too. And when Joe Brand said that Nigel Farage should have acid, someone should throw acid over him, it's also something that's reprehensible and horrible. And I would hope that people don't just go and do what they might think that a comedian or anyone else says, or a TV host.
Absolutely, because there we go on a very dangerous, slippery slope, don't we? So, right, great start, guys. Thank you. After this quick break, reality TV star Jake Quickenden joins me on the show to talk about his experiences of grief, particularly particularly during the Christmas period. That's all after your morning's news.
It is 10:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. An emergency Cobra meeting's being held as thousands of ambulance workers walk off the job.
When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
Ministers are addressing the growing discontent as fresh strikes across various sectors threaten to grind the country to a halt. With the Health Secretary service in England and Wales under severe pressure today, the government is urging the public to be cautious. The Health Secretary has criticised unions for failing to give exemptions to ensure all life-threatening and emergency calls are covered. Steve Barclay says minimum service levels could be introduced in future to guarantee patient safety.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the exemptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government, we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
Ukraine's president is due to arrive in Washington this afternoon for talks with Joe Biden, his first foreign trip since the start of the war in February. Volodymyr Zelensky will address Congress as well and hold a number of meetings to help strengthen Ukrainian resilience and defence capabilities. Controversial gender reforms are expected to pass in the Scottish Parliament today. The bill will remove the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is currently needed to receive a gender recognition certificate. It would also lower the minimum age for applicants to 16 and shorten the required time for people to live in their acquired gender from 2 years to 3 months. On TV, online and DA+ radio, this is GB News. And a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2166 and €1.1468. The price of gold is £1,486.27 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 74.16.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
As a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions. I have no time for cultural totalitarianism. We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:39. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Now, I'm going to be joined next by reality TV star, familiar face to all of you, Jake Quickenden. But to refresh your memory, here he is talking about the biggest difficulty he faced during his time on I'm a Celebrity.
Around the bikini is fair enough, and you accidentally kind of look at the bum or other stuff. Like, it happens. Like, I'm a guy, so you accidentally end up looking.
Just to explain what he was talking about there, I believed on that clip Jake was talking about looking at the women in the jungle on I'm a Celebrity. But Jake joins us now to talk about a much more poignant issue. Good morning, Jake. Thank you for joining us. I'm so sorry we played that clip of you talking about looking at the ladies' bottoms. That wasn't the introduction I was expecting. So, look, there you are in your beautiful house, your Christmas tree. It's a lovely time of the year for people, isn't it? But when you have lost those that you love, it makes it all the more difficult because this is a time of the year for family. And you had a shocker, didn't you, losing your father. What year was that? And then not long after losing your brother?
Yeah, I lost my dad 13 years ago now. And then I lost my little brother 10 years ago now. And it seems like a long time, but for somebody that's gone through kind of loss and grief, it stays quite raw. And I think it's always going to be raw for somebody that's lost somebody. And sometimes I think back and I think, how has it been 10 years that my little brother's not been with me? Because it still seems like yesterday. And Christmas is always quite a tough time and stuff like that. So yeah, it's been a very hard kind of journey to get where I am today with kind of how I deal with my grief and how I deal with my feelings, really.
I bet. I mean, you lost your dad, Paul, in 2008 to bone cancer, and then it was only 2 years later that your brother also got bone cancer, but a different type. Actually, I think my understanding is they weren't necessarily connected.
Yeah.
How old were you at the time, Jake? And how easy was it for you as presumably quite a young boy then to talk about it?
Yeah, it was really tough. Like I was 20, 21, 20, I think, when I lost my dad. So it was really tough, and they were kind of my years where I was going out and I was kind of finding out who I was. Do you know what I mean? And then to have my dad taken away, it kind of made me lose a bit of myself. But I still had my two brothers. So then when Oliver got diagnosed and kind of died so suddenly, I think he had it for 3 years, osteosarcoma, which is, yeah, like you say, kind of bone cancer. That just kind of flipped everything again, because I felt like I needed to protect my younger brother, and then I couldn't help him. And that's kind of something that stayed with me for a long time, the fact that I failed as an older brother, even though I know I didn't. I feel like that's how it made me feel. It took me a long time to get over that, and that's why I'm like an ambassador now to talk about your grief and talk about things, because I feel like maybe if I spoke about it a little bit sooner, and if I talked about the way I felt sooner, then I think I would have come to terms and kind of dealt with it quicker. But I didn't, and I didn't really know there was help out there. I didn't know there was charities, and that's kind of why I have partnership with Co-op Funeral Care, because they help people, and there is help out there, and there's free help out there. You don't have to pay for this help. And it's just talking and just opening up and meeting other people in similar situations that can kind of help you.
When it comes to grief, there's this acronym, isn't there, of I don't know whether you know this, Jake, you probably do, but this idea of BABDA, and it's you go through these stages of recovery, and this first one being busyness. So when somebody dies, there's often a lot of busyness, isn't there? There's organising funerals, there's sorting stuff out, and then you might go through anger, where you're angry at the world and you take it out on your mates, and then you go through B, which is the bargaining, which is what you were saying then about if only I could have done something, if I could have stopped them going out on their bike that day, or if I stopped them getting in the car, or whatever it is. And then D, depression, very commonly. People will get very low, won't they, get very sad. And then ultimately to go through those two, acceptance is, you know, do you feel like you are in that place of acceptance now, and what helped you to get there?
I'd like to think I am, and the fact that I can talk so openly about it now, and also I try and help other people with their grief, I feel like I have accepted it. And obviously I'm still going to miss them. And I actually met a lady in the street yesterday in Lincoln, where I'm currently working, and I met her 8 years ago on a cruise ship, and she remembered me, and we just was chatting away, and she just recently lost somebody, and she said, like, how does it get easier? And I said, I'm not gonna stand here and lie to you. Like, for me, it never gets easier losing somebody. You just start to deal with it better. And I said, like, the memories I used to look back on with my dad and my brother, they used to make me upset, but now when I look back on them, I smile, and I feel like I accept the fact that they're no longer with me, and I accept the fact that we had some amazing times together, and I've still got these cherished memories that will never leave my head. They'll never leave me. And the way I dealt with it, and the way I got to where I am today, is by just opening up and being honest about the way I feel. Like you said, the different emotions you go through. I think for the first 2 years for me, I was just numb. I was in a state of shock and a state of, I didn't want to believe it was real. So I kind of still pretended that they were still alive, and I just couldn't see them.
I'm sure.
And that wasn't really healthy. So I started to accept the fact that they weren't coming back. And I think that's when I started to deal with it, and I started to open up more with my friends, with my family. And I've got a good group of people around me that help me through it. But if you haven't got that group, that's when it can be a struggle. And if you don't know who to turn to, you don't know who to talk to, that's when it becomes hard. But I always say that my Instagram's there. If anyone ever goes through anything, you need to chat. I'll always try and get back, because I know how much it hurts.
Yeah, well, you're newly married. You have a beautiful wife. This is your first Christmas married. And you're in Panto, Jake Quickenden, this year. Where can we see you in Panto this Christmas?
Yeah, I'm in Lincoln at the minute. So I actually finish on Christmas Eve. So I've got quite a short run this year, because I do want to spend my first kind of Christmas married. I've got my little 2-year-old. He's going to be 2 in February. So it's becoming a little bit special for him. And I've got my stepson. So, I wanted to have Christmas Day and Boxing Day at home. But, I'm currently working in Lincoln. But I can't wait to get home.
Yeah, life moves on, doesn't it, through all these different stages. But listen, thank you so much. I bet you've helped a lot of people today. Keep up your good work, supporting those who are bereaved. Much love. Thanks very much, Jake Quickenden. Happy Christmas. I keep thinking it's still weeks away. It's only around the corner. I've got to do all my wrapping this afternoon. Right. Back to our top story now. The government has encouraged members of the public not to take risks today as ambulance workers across England and Wales begin a day of strike action. Our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, has the story.
Another day, another strike. This time, despite last-minute negotiations, over 10,000 ambulance workers across 9 trusts will walk out. A controversial decision, but the unions say workers have been left with no other choice.
They don't want to put patients at risk, but they feel that they're putting them at risk every single day due to the handover delays and waiting times and issues that are completely out of their control. And they're frustrated because they're having to use food banks themselves. They're watching their colleagues suffer. Their mental health is suffering. They're suffering with stress and burnout. So they're feeling at their lowest low, and that's why they've said that now the government must pay attention, because they've ignored us for years.
By law, ambulance workers on strike must still provide life-preserving care when it's needed. But anything less, and they're within their rights not to respond.
Our local teams have worked around the clock for the last few weeks, meeting with ambulance employers to determine what emergency cover will look like at a local level. We will have our members on picket lines outside ambulance stations so that they are ready to respond to emergency calls, and the employers will be there working with our reps to make sure that where life and limb cover is needed, our members are able to respond to that.
Now, as a last resort, the military has been drafted in to support NHS staff during the strikes.
Particularly patients who've had like a stroke or something and don't have the power.
This is part of what we do. The Army is part of the society we live in, and the Army does help where it's needed. This isn't a new task, we've done this before. Certainly with COVID 2 years ago we did Operation Rescript, and it was a very similar idea. So for the soldiers, this isn't any new surprise. It's actually something they're quite used to. They are being trained how to support the NHS when it comes to moving a patient and getting them safely in and out of the ambulance. So they will then support the paramedic on the scene.
Alongside the military, the government may also ask for support from taxi drivers and police officers.
It's important that any responsible government looks at all the contingency plans that we can to mitigate any risk to patient safety. But we've got to recognise that it's the trade unions that need to ensure that there is sufficient cover to meet their obligations in terms of life-threatening responses, so those emergency calls that are absolutely key, that we have sufficient cover in the arrangements that are put in place with each individual ambulance trust.
With another day of ambulance strikes already scheduled for next Wednesday, and patient safety teetering in the balance. For many, an end to this stalemate could be the difference between life and death. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper there. Right, my panel are back here this morning. The immediate past president of the Law Society of England and Wales, Stephanie Boyce, and Alan Miller. You're still here as well. Nice to see you, Alan.
Nice
you ready
to
for
you.
Christmas?
I am, definitely.
Oh, well done. You're the only... Are you, Steph?
Definitely.
Are you?
I'm looking forward to it.
Really? I'm dreading it. I've not done anything. Right. It's ages away, isn't it? I keep thinking it's weeks away. No, it's only this weekend. Tomorrow's my last show. Right. Prince Andrew, the musical. This is going to be on Channel 4 this Christmas. Is this in bad taste, Stephanie?
Well, I don't know if it's in bad taste. I mean, what I would say is that, Channel 4, serious, broadcaster and so forth, clearly commissioned it because there must be an interest for it. I would like to think that over the Christmas... I don't know when it's going to air, actually, but I would like to think that, that if people have got nothing else better to watch, then this gives them an option.
They handle him very... But if you think about it, isn't it fascinating, Alan, the difference between him as a royal figure of fun and Meghan Markle, perhaps, as a royal figure of hate? Are they treated differently?
Well, I'm not sure he's really seen as a figure of fun, but what I would say about this is that it's interesting that people always like to present the viewing public as ignorant, stupid, also always wanting the most gratuitous things, lowest common denominator. But I actually think one of the problems is our cultural gatekeepers. There's been a constant discussion in the last 20 years of dumbing down. I, for a while, was working with the Arts Council in London. But I am very concerned that the general discussion is that we, as the smart and the great and the good, know all these things, right? We like classical music. We think all these things are really important, great literature and the arts. But those people, they want tittle, tattle and taff. And it's quite insulting. And we've seen a race to the bottom in many ways. So, look, I'm not a killjoy. I think if something's going to be, hopefully, a bit like anything, like Hamilton or anything, right? If you want to do something, you can make it funny. Often things are done through the lens of the current political climate, not necessarily what it was there. We know that about Shakespeare and other things. A
comedy musical about Prince Andrew. I guess what Channel 4 does, isn't it? They're trying to kind of push the envelope a little bit and be a bit controversial. Hey, we're talking about it, so it works. Right. Big story in the Mirror today. Main story at Mirror Online. Common COVID symptom. Most infected people who develop may be confused for a cold. Why are they still telling us the difference, Alan Miller, between
Well, I'm not
COVID
sure,
symptoms
because
and
I think
cold?
that basically it is like a common cold now. But we should remind ourselves that a year ago we were discussing, or it was being held over us, that we could be back in lockdowns and restrictions, and we still had a vaccine mandate, and the rhetoric was shrill. We've been talking about free speech. It's important that people could say things, but they were making all sorts of accusations. When the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, seems like a long time ago, said he was going to not have restrictions, people were calling him irresponsible. They said that could lead to murder. 300,000 people extra would die as a consequence of it. We now have seen that's not the case. What I think we all need to do is take a step back and remember, when we want to talk about some people speaking in a certain way, is that we have had a period where there's been this alarmism and there's been fear stoked, and actually we need to do things in a cold, rational, calm way and assess and evaluate things. And lots of people have become sick, and also having been locked down and kids not being with one another and everything, all of us probably have had some of this, and we definitely know people that have had it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephanie, what do you think? I worry when I see these headlines that people are going to start getting unnecessarily frightened again.
Well, I think the reality is, so let's be clear, a sore throat is still the most common symptom of COVID at some 64% of cases. And of course, as we gather for the holidays, it's going to be a real concern for many. But, you know, the aftermath of COVID, still lingers, although it's very much with us, because there are still quite a few, I think, estimated 1.3 million people still infected up to the week of December the 5th. But if we look at the economic symptom of COVID, you know, some 57% of small businesses going out of business in the last year up until November. That's an incredible amount. The economic symptom shock of COVID still is very much with us and will still be with us for a long time.
Can I just say that I don't think that's because of COVID, though. I think that's because of the policies of lockdowns and restrictions and impositions, which many warned against. And some people just insulted people for things like shielding. But now we're dealing with all the legacies. You're absolutely right, Stephanie. The economic fallout, the cost of living, what I would call cost of lockdown crisis, and the health impacts. And let's do a risk assessment now. No one wanted to do it at the start. Let's never allow anything like this to happen again with the lockdowns, and actually assess all the damages and the impacts that are happening. We have got a COVID inquiry that allegedly is going to be addressing it, but many of their terms of reference are really not fit for purpose.
Yeah. Very much so. Right, we've come to the end of our first hour. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back with more after a short break. We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deems & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. 25,000 ambulance workers have walked out in the first of two one-day strikes. I'll be rejoined by my panel shortly to discuss that. We've got the co-founder of the Together Declaration, Alan Miller, and the former president of the Law Society, Stephanie Boyce. We're going to be talking also about the 20-minute cities where you will, in this country, where you won't be allowed to move freely under your own decision-making powers. What does that mean for us all? And also the rumbling along Rwanda legal situation relating to immigration. We're going to be looking at that, of course. Stephanie is a lawyer. I want to hear her take on that. That's all after your latest news with Aaron.
Good morning, it's a minute past 11. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. An emergency COBRA meeting's being held as thousands of ambulance workers walk off the job.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
Ministers are addressing the growing discontent as fresh strikes across various sectors threaten to grind the country to a halt. With the health service in England and Wales under severe pressure today, the government's urging the public to be cautious. The Health Secretary has criticised unions for failing to give exemptions to ensure all life-threatening and emergency calls are covered. Steve Barclay says minimum service levels could be introduced in future to guarantee patient safety.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the exemptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government, we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
And the Unite Union's General Secretary says the Prime Minister needs to negotiate.
These people do not want to be out on strike. They're being forced to go out on strike because the government just doesn't seem to want to listen. We've been saying to the government for weeks and weeks now, come back round the table and negotiate. And until they do that, the strikes are going to continue. Rishi Sunak is missing in action. For 25 years that I've negotiated, I have never seen such an abdication of leadership. He needs to get back round the negotiating table, let's do the deal, and then these people can go back to work.
Hundreds of members of the armed forces have been drafted in to cover for the striking ambulance workers, taking non-urgent patients to and from hospital. However, they're not allowed to drive through red lights, turn on ambulances' blue lights or treat patients. Former SAS soldier Phil Campion told GB News the Army is used to stepping in when there's industrial action.
My first ever job in the military, right, we went down to West Glamorgan in those Green Goddess fire engines and we stood in for a fire service which were on strike, OK? The bin strike, squaddies turned out for that. All sorts of strikes we've stood in before. It's part and parcel of the job. It's what you signed up for. Like I say, defending the country comes in many ways, shapes and forms, and this is all part of the job.
Meanwhile, the Met Police Commissioner says the ambulance and nursing strikes are causing more work for his staff.
Too many of our tens of thousands of great officers are spending time on health and social care work. We're dealing with too much that other agencies should be dealing with, particularly mental health. And we've started conversations with NHS colleagues about how they take that work back from us. And that's really important because I need my great men and women to doing more for London in policing and not filling in behind other agencies.
And in some breaking news, a man has admitted murdering a mother and 3 children in Derbyshire. Damien Bendel killed Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, as well as Lacey's friend Connie Gent in Killamarsh in September last year. He also pleaded guilty to raping one of the children. The 32-year-old will be sentenced later today. And more breaking news, a man has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The 9-year-old was shot by a gunman who chased a convicted burglar into her home in Liverpool in August. Olivia's family members were also in court as Thomas Cashman appeared via video link, some of the family shaking their heads as the not guilty pleas were entered. Ukraine's president is due to arrive in Washington this afternoon for talks with Joe Biden. It will be his first foreign trip since the beginning of the war in February. Volodymyr Zelensky will also address Congress and hold a number of bilateral meetings to help strengthen Ukrainian resilience and defence capabilities. Earlier this week, the US confirmed a new package of military aid for Ukraine worth £1.6 billion, including a Patriot missile system to help Ukraine defend its infrastructure against Russian attacks. Controversial gender reforms are expected to pass in the Scottish Parliament today. The bill will remove the need for a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is currently needed to receive a gender recognition certificate. It would also lower the minimum age for applicants to 16 and would shorten the required time for people to live in their acquired gender from 2 years to 3 months. The bill's been one of the most controversial debated in Holyrood since devolution. Donald Trump's tax returns over a 6-year period will be made public, despite his long-running efforts to keep them secret. A committee in the US House of Representatives has voted to publish his returns between 2015 and 2021, that is, before and during his time as president. It will bring to an end a 4-year battle by the Democrats to scrutinise Trump's tax affairs. Control of the US House will pass to the Republicans in January. Elon Musk says he'll step down as chief executive of Twitter as soon as he finds someone foolish enough to take the job, his words. More than 57% of users who voted in a Twitter poll posted by Elon Musk said he should quit. The boss of Tesla and SpaceX, though, says he still plans to head the software and server teams. And this is GB News. We will bring you more. As it happens now, it is back to Bev.
Very good morning. Welcome back to Bev Turner today on GB News. So today marks the first day of ambulance strikes as 25,000 workers will walk out this morning in the first of 2 one-day strikes. Health Secretary Steve Barclay has urged you to take extra care during the strike, warning NHS plans will not cover all 999 calls. What do you think about that? I'm not sure you can take much care if you're having a heart attack, can you? Anyway, we've got a special report from our Northern Ireland reporter, Doggy Beattie, about terminally ill children who've enjoyed a Lapland trip to visit Santa. We'll glimpse their excitement as they and their families create memories that they will cherish forever. And I'm going to be joined back in the studio by the smartest guests on TV in about 15 minutes with a look at the day's biggest stories, including are people who work from home lazy, or is it providing the change to work-life balance that we all need? And of course, this show is nothing without you and your views. Today on Twitter, we've got a poll asking you, with lots of government ministers and officials telling you to be careful due to strikes, will you change your behaviour this Christmas as we are being advised? Well, at the moment, 88% of you say no, you won't change your behaviour. So do vote in our poll. Also email me gbviews@gbnews.uk to have your say. So thousands of ambulance workers have walked out on their first day of 2 days of strike action. An emergency COBRA meeting is being held by the government as the workers walk off the job. The government is now telling you to be extra cautious over the Christmas period. And Home Secretary Suella Braverman is facing questions from the Home Affairs Select Committee. Let's get the latest with GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey. Good morning, Darren. What is the latest on this COBRA meeting?
Well, so it's taking place in Westminster. Clearly, the government trying to work out contingency plans for how to deal with particularly the paramedic strike today. We know members of the army have been drafted in, but frankly, the service is not going to be up to the usual standards. And even then, those standards have been questioned in recent months, haven't they, about how punctual ambulance services are, with people often having to wait hours to receive care. It's going to be quite difficult today. You've got essentially the NHS telling people, as you've just been reporting on, to be extra cautious in terms of their activities, not to do something that may put them in danger, by the simple reason that for most NHS trusts across England, they are now in a critical situation, i.e. they are having to rely on other resources in the healthcare system just to keep going today. As for the negotiations between the government and the unions, not just the paramedics, but also the nurses and indeed the rail workers, the postal workers, baggage handlers, you could go on. The government is sticking to its line very much, that it is not prepared to go beyond what the independent pay bodies are offering in terms of pay. It does not want to reopen negotiations on pay at all, and that has meant that the unions, frankly, are not terribly happy and not willing to go into negotiations if the government is not prepared to talk about that particular subject. In fact, we've heard from one union leader today saying of Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, that this is the worst abdication of leadership that they have seen in 25 years. He said that it lies squarely, he argues, Sharon Graham, it all lies squarely at the door of the government, this strike action. And in that, I think that's where it gets quite tricky, Bev, for the government, in the sense that if you look at opinion polls in regards to this, particularly when it comes to paramedics and nurses, it does seem that the public, at least, are on the side of those taking strike action, and at the moment, frankly, seem to be blaming the government for all the disruption.
So, currently facing questions too this morning. What do we know about that?
Yeah, MPs are already on the Christmas break, but the good members of the House of Lords are still working today, though it is their last day before their Christmas break too. As you say, they've got the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, in front of them this morning, the Home Affairs and Justice Committee, essentially looking at clearly this issue of immigration and what is happening with the Rwanda plan. We know that High Court decision on Monday give the go-ahead, if you like, at least for the government in the interim term, about the Rwanda plan. Let's have a listen in to what the Home Secretary has had to say.
I think that our general regime for welcoming people on humanitarian grounds is very generous. We've welcomed over 450,000 people since 2015, and it's one of the largest numbers of people who've come here fleeing conflict, persecution, seeking security and refuge in this country. I would also say that we have 100 million people who are displaced globally, and it's not feasible for all of those people who might wish to come to the UK to do so. We don't have an unlimited capacity to welcome every single person who is in a difficult situation in their home country into the UK. That is a regrettable fact of the modern world and life, but it is the right one. We do have to have a limit.
I got quite spicy at points, this committee meeting with Suella Braverman. Lots of questions about the Human Rights Act and the European Court of Justice in regards to all of this, but also it must be said in regards to the Rwanda plan about what precisely is going to happen with this. You know, we know there's going to be appeal actions, but how many people are the government expecting to potentially send to Rwanda? And in addition to that, how much is the costing? No clear, obvious answers in regards to all of that. But Suella Braverman seems to be saying that the government needs to get a grip of this mobiles crisis, or frankly, it will be the public that blame the government for failing to get a grip.
OK, thank you, Darren. Darren McCaffrey down there in Westminster. A lot of you getting in touch about the NHS strikes. Jane has said, I worked for over 14 years in urgent care and saw the pittance of the pay offered to nurses. Too many managers being paid £50,000. Too many quangos, chief executives being paid £350,000. It must be reformed tooth and nail, right from the core, along with social care, in order to have a viable health service. A lot of you concurring with that particular attitude there. Marty says, throwing money at the NHS is not working. It needs totally restructuring. Keep your messages coming. Now, Olivia Utley, our political reporter, is here. Olivia, you're here to tell me about some legal changes north of the border which will affect gender reassignment. What's happened?
Well, this is hugely controversial legislation which has been going through Holyrood for the past couple of months. And essentially what it will do when it is passed this evening, which it almost certainly will be, is make it possible for Scots to change their legal sex after just 3 months of living in their acquired gender without any form of medical intervention or even a gender dysphoria diagnosis. So it essentially removes all checks and balances around gender reassignment. At the moment, it's a much more complicated process. You need to basically prove that you are transgender. This is controversial because obviously, it runs the risks of running roughshod over women's rights and making it easier for those who aren't actually transgender but are posing as transgender to gain access to women's spaces by claiming to be living in the wrong sex, essentially.
So kind of in theory, if you're a male criminal waiting to go to prison for your sentencing, and that's going to take longer than 3 months, you could then just say, I am now a woman, and go to a women's prison.
Yes, and what is quite extraordinary about this is last night was the last set of amendments being debated in Holyrood, and it was the latest. I was just been talking to a woman who was there watching it all unfold, and it was the latest that Holyrood has ever sat. There's nothing urgent about this legislation. The only urgency behind the legislation is that Nicola Sturgeon wants to get it through before Christmas. It seems because one of her closest allies, Kate Forbes, is on maternity leave, and she is against this legislation, and Nicola Sturgeon, it seems, wants to get it through before Kate Forbes gets back from maternity leave. So there was a 10-hour sitting last night, ending at 2 a.m, while all sorts of amendments were discussed. One of the amendments which was rejected was an amendment which would stop those who've been accused of sex crimes from gaining a gender recognition certificate before they've been tried.
Right.
Which that amendment would have prevented the scenario that you just laid out. But it was rejected. So that could still happen. It has caused a massive rupture in Holyrood, as you would expect. And what's particularly interesting about it politically is that there are plenty of SNP MSPs who are very much against this legislation. There was Ash Reagan, of course, who famously resigned from the government last month about it. But we can expect to see quite a big SNP rebellion this evening, which puts quite a lot of strain on Nicola Sturgeon's grip on power.
It's fascinating. Could we just stop the world, Olivia? I think I want to get off on days like this. I'm not sure I can live on this planet anymore. Can you? Let me know what you think about that. Thank you for bringing us up to speed, and no doubt we might talk about it tomorrow, depending on what happens this evening. Thanks, Olivia Rutley there. I'm going to go and have a little lie down in a dark room. It's time for a quick break. My panel will be back with me after that break to discuss the top stories of the day. Alan Miller, Stephanie Boyce will include an analysis of this plan to send migrants to Rwanda that Suella Braverman is being grilled on as we speak. And also we're going to talk about whether we're all getting a bit lazy with all of this working from home, or is it achieving the perfect work-life balance? All that to discuss after this quick break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Very good morning. It's 11:21. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. My guests are back here this morning. I've hot-footed it over to the breakfast bar. Stephanie Boyce is here with us, lawyer and co-founder of the Together campaign, Alan Miller. Now, Rwanda asylum policy is lawful, the High Court rules. This broke a couple of days ago now. Was it the end of last week? I don't know. I'm losing track of time. Stephanie, how do you take this news and will we see any immigrants on any planes anytime soon, do you think?
Well, I mean,
Absolutely. So first of all, this decision by the High Court is subject to appeal until January the 16th, and by all indications, it's looking like it will be appealed. And of course, what the government has said is, taking into capacity and so forth, it's unlikely that any action is going to take place before the 16th of January. But of course, despite the fact that the court has said that this policy is lawful, what's clear is that this is about access to justice and ensuring that individuals have access to legal advice. And of course, we know that those who've been detained, because that story has been very clear over the last couple of days, that if you've been detained, you're entitled to 30 minutes of legal aid, legal advice and so forth, that has not always happened. And of course, what the court has also said is, despite finding that this policy is lawful, it has asked the Home Office to reconsider 8 cases where it wasn't satisfied that the removal or the policy had been properly considered. So this is around, as a lawyer, as you know, and certainly the Law Society has come out very vocally about this, this is about ensuring access to justice and recognising and upholding the rule of law.
So do you support the policy?
The policy, what the court has said that this policy is lawful. That's what the court has said. They, abreast of all of the facts before them, have determined that it is a lawful policy. And what I'm saying is that the government should respect the policy, the decision of the court, but respect the policy to ensure that it's properly applied and that no one is unduly... Because once you send somebody to Rwanda, I'm not clear that there is no coming back to the United Kingdom.
It's a one-way ticket.
Absolutely. And what's also not clear is whether or not the rights that we enjoy in the United Kingdom will be... you will also enjoy those same rights in Rwanda.
So it's because of people like you, it's you lawyers that drag this out, isn't it?
No, lawyers exist, we do a public service, and we are there to ensure that the laws are applied properly and people's rights are respected.
Well, why are you always one step ahead of the politicians? Doesn't feel, Alan Miller, like the politicians come up with something, people go, oh, that sounds like a fairly decent idea, maybe, and then Stephanie's lot all come in and bang, they're all in the court and it drags it out for months.
Well, I do think what's happened with this particular policy has been that many people have actively tried to campaign and stop something that was in a democratic government has said it wants, and it seems like the majority of the population have said that they want. Now, campaigning is really important and people should do it. Having said that, there's been all sorts of... It almost gets to the point where you think, when can a government implement something that it wants to do without being tied up all the time? So whatever I think about the policy or not, I mean, one of the problems is I think that there's been a collapse both in France and Britain with the whole addressing of the question of borders. I think borders are really important. I also happen to think there's a big discussion we can have about who comes in, how, what it means and everything. I think Suella Braverman made a fair point that we're very welcoming in Britain. We have had a lot of people coming and there are concerns, but I also get concerned about some of the shrill debate on each side of this. But I think Kit Morehouse was saying it's got to the point where it's being bogged down with so many people trying to stop it that the actual due process democratically of an elected government with a huge mandate at the time of their election where they were wanting to implement this is being prevented. So it's a question about sovereignty and democracy as well that gets limited. But I also agree, it's a bit nuanced, that it's very important that we as a generous and as a lawful and fantastic, brilliant, important society, that we provide that to people that are coming here in the way that we would want. The final point I'd make about this is, though, no one seems to ever talk about the EU, because we kept being told that with the EU we'd all be better, more democratic, nicer, and all this, ignorant people voted for Brexit. And yet, the EU's had these displacement policies and had deals with Colonel Gaddafi, with Libya for like 20 years, even after what was going on there, they continued with that. And no one seems to be talking about any of those things. I'm not saying goose and gander, but I just wonder why there's been so much vitriol against Suella in this policy, but people have had silence over when the EU has done it.
Should we leave the ECHR in a word?
It would take more than a word for me to answer that question.
But go on, briefly. Would it help if we weren't in the European Convention of Human Rights? Would these policies that our MPs want to push through happen much more quickly?
I don't know, but what the government has said is we're not going to leave the ECHR, and they're in a better position to answer that question than I am.
When you finished in politics, Stephanie, were you going to go and be an MP? I think you'd be great. I think they need you. Right. Working from home. This is rumbling on. I think it's been one of the biggest social changes of our generation. It happened, obviously, it's probably, I would say, the only good thing to come out of the pandemic is that a lot of employees now have a bit more choice, but there are pros and cons to this, are there not? Alan Miller, Andre Spicer has written a comment piece in The Guardian to say why Jacob Rees-Mogg, Alan Sugar, the Daily Mail are getting it wrong about working from home. A left-leaning journalist saying we should all have the choice.
Well, I work quite flexibly all over the place, and I have done for quite a long time, actually way before lockdowns. But there's no getting away from the fact that in terms of productivity, we have a massive problem with productivity in Britain. We have actually, for the last 3 decades, sluggish wages, a lack of investment, not big, ambitious, robust R&D, and the workplace. And in some areas, the kind of so-called disruption of the tech arena, it's been interesting that you can move in different areas and you can work remotely, and that's good in some circumstances. But we should remember it's not 1.2 million, but we have up to about 5 million people who are not actually working. Yeah. So there's a conversation about working, there's a conversation about some young people think perhaps they should never work, and there's also a way about how do you make it as productive as possible. And I think that everyone knows this, right? When you're actually with people in the flesh and discussing and working, you can get much more creative output. Yeah. That doesn't mean you should never have remote access, but there's a problem with this idea that everyone's just going to stay at home. It's not just also about productivity. Our daily interactions, the meetings, how we get on with people, those things create a life. They matter. And also for all the other activity around it. And I just think this it's a bit like a legacy of the lockdown approach, right? This idea that, and it's some people, of course, right? Because obviously we know that other people that are doing manual work, that have kept everything going during the lockdowns, right? They're out working, grafting all the time.
Yeah. I was talking to some people over the weekend, Stephanie, and there was several generations around one breakfast table. And, of course, those of us 40s and a bit older and some a bit younger, particularly those who had younger children in their 30s, they love the working from home option because they say they're spending less on commute, they're spending less on childcare, they can actually ask for less wages. 20-year-olds at the table saying we hate it. So we can't afford our own house. We're working in one bedroom. I have to sit there and work, and I'm not going out to meet somebody. I'm not going to meet people, and to possibly meet their romantic future in the workplace. Who knows?
Well, absolutely, and that is something that we heard in the legal profession as well, that the younger generation, those coming into the profession, miss those conversations, miss those interactions. On a personal level, I've seen more colleagues wanting to see me in person rather than to do it online. And, of course, one can't discount the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, where he says that return to the workplace would boost productivity. And, of course, that some of the things that Alan speaks to that, in as much that we know, it's been reported, that working from home for 3 days a week, say, is equivalent to a 6.7% pay rise. And if you work in finance and tech, it's equivalent to 10%. But above all of that, it's about mental health and well-being, because there was another piece that came out this week around individuals who work from home, their personal hygiene and so forth has actually gone down slightly.
Oh, I can believe it. I've got teenagers. I know exactly what they're talking about. It's true. It's not good for us, is it? In every day, I think it's. And I'm glad we're having this debate. It feels like we have this debate quite often, but I think it's incredibly important because I don't know about you, Alan, but I worry that this is going to become the norm without us discussing the pros and cons of it and therefore making allowances for how it might affect people, particularly the young.
I think we're social creatures, and how we learn and inform and inspire is when we're around one another and those things happen. And I think it's really, really important. And I agree that people should be insistent on people coming in to places. Not to say that it can never happen remotely. It's great to use technology, but the question of our productivity in Britain is one we have to address with the things we were talking about earlier in terms of the NHS, how does it get paid for, but also in terms of all of our infrastructure, our energy costs and requirements and our needs, and that needs a committed, engaged workforce, and people that are there are also getting paid better because everyone's earning more money.
Absolutely. Right, thanks, guys. After this quick break, Lapland Cancer Trust is giving terminally ill children a truly magical experience this Christmas, flying from Belfast to Lapland, which for many children may be their first time on a plane. That's all after your morning's news.
It's 11:31. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Some breaking news in the last few minutes. Nurses in Scotland will announce strike dates in the new year after union members overwhelmingly rejected the latest pay offer from the Scottish Government. An emergency COBRA meeting is currently being held meanwhile as thousands of ambulance workers, including paramedics and call handlers, walk off the job.
What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it? When?
The ministers are addressing the growing discontent as fresh strikes across various sectors threaten to bring the country to a halt. With the health service in England and Wales under severe pressure today, the government is urging the public to be cautious. The health secretary has criticised unions for failing to give exemptions to ensure all life-threatening and emergency calls are covered. Steve Barclay says minimum service levels could be introduced in future to guarantee patient safety.
Clearly, we will need to look at the data from today to see whether the exemptions that the trade unions have promised materialise. They've said, on the one hand, they want to cause maximum disruption, but on the other hand, that they don't want to cause harm to patients. So we've tried to work constructively with the trade unions, but of course, if we see significant patient harm, then as a government, we will need to look at what is done in terms of minimum service levels.
A man's admitted murdering a mother and 3 children in Derbyshire. Damien Bendel killed Terry Harris, her children Lacey and John Paul Bennett, as well as Lacey's friend Connie Gent in Killamarsh in September last year. He also pleaded guilty to raping one of the children. The 32-year-old will be sentenced later today. A man's pleaded not guilty to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. The 9-year-old was shot by a gunman who chased a convicted burglar into her home in Liverpool in August. Olivia's family was in Liverpool Crown Court when Thomas Cashman appeared via video link, and some of them seen shaking their heads as the pleas were entered. Ukraine's president is due to arrive in Washington this afternoon for talks with Joe Biden, his first foreign trip since Russia's invasion in February. Volodymyr Zelensky will also address Congress and hold a number of bilateral meetings to help strengthen Ukrainian resilience and defence capabilities. On TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. But don't go anywhere. Bev will be back in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 11:37. This is Bev Turner today on GB News. Well, as the Northern Ireland Children to Lapland charity heads off to Lapland today, a group of life-limited children and their families are in for the adventure of a lifetime. GB News Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie joins the charity on the memorable trip. Here's what he had to say before taking off from Belfast Airport earlier.
Well, good morning and welcome to Belfast International Airport. How do you get around travel problems? Well, hire your own jet and take people to Lapland to find Santa. The atmosphere in here is absolutely magical. We have a choir from Uri, we have some of the children singing here. It is a fantastic, fantastic trip, and it gives a chance to make real memories. Joining me now is Colin Barkley. He is the chairman of the Children to Lapland Trust. Colin, tell us a bit about today.
Oh, it's just a fabulous day. We obviously haven't been able to get to Lapland for the last 3 years, so we're back again today, and it's 6:30 in the morning, and as you say, the atmosphere is just very special.
What sort of arrangements and sort of planning do you have to do to get this off the ground?
It's huge. I mean, we've chartered our own plane. It's a 189-seater. In the past, we've had a 220-seater, but 189 was the maximum we could get this year. There are nearly 100 children. There's doctors, there's nurses, everything on board in terms of medicines that they might need. I think we've 25 kids in wheelchairs. We have kids who've never been out of Northern Ireland because they can't get insurance, so we have to put all that in place. Nobody puts their hands in their pocket at any stage during the day. There's party on the plane on the way there. There's an even bigger party on the plane on the way back. And you think these kids will be tired? Not a bit of it. And you see the smiles all day long.
It means everything, really, to be honest. We've never been in a family trip like this before, so it's going to be magical.
So tell me, what are you looking forward to seeing?
Santa. Santa.
What about you?
Snow. Snow.
Hiya.
Hiya.
Well, what are you doing?
Very good.
And are you looking forward to going?
Yeah.
Are you going to see Santa?
I'm going to see Santa.
Ah, and what are you going to ask him for?
A present.
Oh, you've the right idea.
As we dream by the fire, to face unafraid the plans that we made, walking in a winter wonderland.
How lovely. Dougie Beattie there at Belfast Airport. Now, my panel are back here this morning. Immediate past President of the Law Society of England and Wales, I, Stephanie Boyce, and co-founder of the Together campaign, Alan Miller. Right, Alan, the Green agenda is taking inspiration from the illiberal days of lockdown. What's happening in Oxford?
Well, Oxford has something called a 15-minute city that they want to implement. We have already been told by Duncan Enright, who's got the title as a cabinet as being the head of transport and development, but actually seems to not want to do too much development and only want certain kinds of transport. What they want to do... now, bear in mind that Oxford already has lots of LTNs, low-traffic neighbourhoods, which we've seen happen all across the country. There's been gridlock in places like Hackney, Haringey and in Brixton, and we'll come back to that. But they have a number of LTNs that have really suffocated local businesses and residents. And now they're saying what they want to have is bus gates. They call them all a trial. They say it's a trial. When they did, but they have bus gates, which will mean you can't drive in many arteries, and you're only allowed 100 passes a year. So if you have 2 cars, that means 50 each, to go to certain areas, and you otherwise have to go much further around a whole ring road. So it's meaning that people's journeys that are really important are getting massively delayed. There's far more pollution. It's allegedly to stop some pollution, they say, but there's pollution often in very run-down areas. Many people in East Oxford who are much poorer and much more run down, they don't have facilities around them in 15 minutes to walk to. So once again, ordinary people are being punished more. But the thing that's most problematic with this in Oxford, and we're seeing it happen in some other cities across the UK, is that when consultations go out, like they have done with the low-traffic neighbourhoods, the majority of people are responding saying no. 5,600 respondents in Oxford responded. And if you look at, there was a Freedom of Information form, if you look at the responses on some, over 3,600 were negative on one of them, which constituted 93%. In spite of all of that, and also people going around saying that, there were representatives saying the majority of people believe in this, businesses have challenged it, residents have challenged it, and they're still going ahead. And they're calling it all a trial, but the trial of the 15-minute city can't exist without the trial of the LTNs. And as Duncan Enright said, it's happening anyway. Now, another thing to note about this, where this has come from is that the international C40s, which is mayors internationally, who Sadiq Khan is currently the chair of that, so they're from around the States and other countries internationally, we've got a declaration to tackle the emergency climate crisis.
Right.
As though the issue in cities is not better hospitals or housing or infrastructure or transport or any of those things, but there's this crisis. It's almost like a perpetual state of crisis, rather than a sober addressing of how we deal with things if there are some conditions that we need to change. And he, in London, Sadiq Khan, who's the current mayor, who's now saying he's going to stand for a 3rd term, has said, well, even though 73% responded against ULEZ expansion, where you have taxi drivers and, again, working-class people being impacted in their areas, and it's another tax on drivers and impositions, even though we said that, well, it's not a referendum, I'm not really that interested, I'm not doing it like that, utterly undemocratic, a whole patrician attitude. We've seen that, the Muslim community in Oxford can't get to the mosque, elderly people and others. And what's going to be happening is, I know certainly at Together we have a lot of signatories and members in Oxford, in Edinburgh, in Cardiff and in Canterbury, where these things are all happening. They are organising and they're getting vocal. And I think that people should realise that, you might think that this is a done deal, but a lot of people are very unhappy. And just as lockdown has finished and we've gone through all of this and all these businesses are suffering, now a lot of them are being killed by this, and it's really, really wrong.
Does it sound to you, Stephanie, like, oh, this benevolent thing, we're going to save the planet and it's not going to be a huge imposition, but it's got this coercive undertone where there's no lack of choice, and as Alan's just explained so brilliantly, no lack of democracy in this decision-making process?
Well, absolutely. I think that's one of the most objectionable, concerning things, is the fact that any objections from residents is or will be overruled. But I think, we've spent much of the morning talking about freedom of speech. This is about freedom of choice, the choice to use whatever transport that is available to you, that you can afford, as to how you move. I think we're all agreed that, of course, there is a climate emergency. We're all agreed that we need to...
I don't think we are. That kind of sentence troubles me. I think we all agree that we need to look after our planet, dispose of your waste. Let's not fill our seas with plastic. Let's have clean water. Let's try and have clean air where possible. But that's what I think this is all predicated on, this idea that there is an emergency and therefore we have to change the minutiae of our life. We have to go back to that, don't we?
Well, absolutely. But this strategy that's been deployed or thought up by this group that Alan referenced, perhaps takes into consideration all of that. But what it doesn't do, or the concern is, it doesn't take into account the more vulnerable parts of our society in terms of trying to implement a policy that is for the good of the planet and so forth, but not thinking about the real everyday life implications of deploying this policy.
I'm not, of course we worry about the vulnerable in society, of course we do. But this doesn't... I'm not objecting to this on that basis. I want all members of society to have freedom to go around everywhere. It will impact on your right if you're a wheelchair user, maybe, and you can't just hop on a bicycle like Sadiq Khan thinks we all can in the morning, or taking the kids to swimming club via the supermarket. You can't do that on a bicycle, or particularly on a bus. It's completely detached from real life. So what should people do, Alan?
Well, I think in the first instance, in each of the cities, there are already established groups who've been challenging LTNs and the 15-minute city.
So that's low-traffic neighbourhoods.
Neighbourhoods, yeah. And there's a number of campaigns that are happening in London and across the country. In Oxford, there are going to be some more things happening. On January 24th, the council is going to be stating how this next thing's going to be rolled out. And just to say, they have a plan that both for the hospital and the schools, there's going to be an additional tax on car parks. So key workers, teachers, nurses and others, are now going to be charged double the amount to bring their cars in. Oxford's already, in many areas, not a livable city for key workers. This is going to be imposed on them. This is by a mixture of Labour, Lib Dems and Green, but actually the Conservatives wanted it as well. This whole idea that we're caring and considerate, what tends to happen all the time is it's being impacted on the worst off. And so there's going to be a discussion about what happens with that. But I have a hunch that a lot of people, because I've seen already the groups that are there organised, and a lot more are going to be challenging and asking questions. I think people can put pressure on their local councillors and on their MPs and on the government. And we together are going to be representing some of our signatories and members in different cities, but also bringing this to national government because the whole way that we do our transport, infrastructure, housing, business are all interrelated.
And you know what?
This final point on net zero, everyone seems to think that it's a done deal. And yet I think it needs much more critical attention.
The whole thing does. And you know what? You won't really hear the BBC talking about Oxford's plans. You won't really hear the other channels discussing it. We're talking about it because it really affects you. And that's what's really important. And it will all happen without you having any consent. Right, Boris Becker, talking of people who didn't have consent, he got sent to prison, didn't he? He's come out, he's now given his first interview, and it gives us quite an interesting insight, doesn't it, Stephanie, into life in prison?
Well, absolutely. So what struck me about this, so first of all, he was sentenced to 30 months in prison for concealing assets to avoid paying debts. He served 231 days. But what struck me about this is he spoke about being a number as opposed to being Boris. Nobody cared whether he was a Wimbledon champion, tennis champion or so forth. But he talked about Wandsworth, HMP Wandsworth. He described it as extremely dirty and extremely dangerous. He talked about murderers, child abusers, drug dealers, every kind of criminal you can imagine. Well, that's what you find in prisons. But the fact that, you know, he had to be protected and he now has these blood brothers who came to his aid and protected him. But for me, it gave a very interesting insight into the state of our prisons.
Do we get it right, Alan, with our legal system and our prisons? Should they be harsher, do you think? It's a big question.
I think there's crime and punishment's a very big question, and I think that if you do, you know, people know if they commit a crime, there should be punishment, and then but there should be rehabilitation, and there should be attempts to educate and engage. Too much of what we see all round in terms of the infrastructure, the old Victorian buildings, the lack of space, recidivism, that, you know, people going back and committing more crimes or learning more comes back from that. So if we're going to have a commitment to certain things, that's a really key one. And I think we have to address a bit of an elephant in the room when it comes to our prisons, which is that the question of the war on drugs and the impact of that on everyone and on young people and groups. So if you took away non-violent crimes where people do things that they choose to do themselves and don't harm other people, there would be a lot of people that would not be in our prisons. There'd be a lot of other areas that not be taken up. The Treasury could make some money from it. You could have a harm reduction approach, but it would also mean that everything from international syndicates and crime gangs to moving of people, terrorism and everything would not be underwritten by that. There are some countries that have done that, and there are some states in America that are experimenting, exploring with that. But I think that, you know, the question of how we treat prisoners in society and our notion of rehabilitation and all of that really speaks to who we are, and you need to have a commitment to those things.
This is your area of expertise, of course, Stephanie. What would you do?
Well, to start with, absolutely. First of all, I don't think we should be taking any lessons from the United States of America in terms of our prison population or how to run our prisons. But I do think this calls for extra resources in our prisons, those who work in the prisons, those who are in the prisons, and, of course, in the justice system, full stop. This is an area that has been underfunded for a significant amount of time. And until we get there, and what Boris talks about is, you know, not having breakfast. He talks about the lack of humanity in our jails. At the end of the day, for whatever reason, and we know there are people in prisons who shouldn't be there for some of the reasons that Alan spoke about, but we need to bring back the humanity and properly fund the justice system, including prisons.
OK, right. Olivia Otley came in before just to talk about this law in Scotland, which is likely to be passed tonight. This is to let people aged 16 and 17 change sex from the ages of 16 and 17, change sex on their birth certificate. This is a bit of a hot potato, Alan. You know, there's the trans activists who get incredibly passionate about this topic, and then there are those of us who want to discuss it calmly. What's your position on it?
Well, if we've got rules and laws that you've got to be 18 to drink alcohol and to vote, I find this astonishing that we're talking about 16 and 17-year-olds. And then there's that one question, and then the decision about that, and then it's not just about that, it's also, it looks like it's an active policy that's being promoted. And the question that they would have 3 months to make a decision about their gender, and there are some people that are actively encouraging particularly young people, to think about things in a certain way. That's not an open discussion.
No.
That's driving things in a certain direction.
And it is that element of... I do think there is an element of that coercion word again. The bill will remove the need for a psychiatric diagnosis of gender dysphoria, reduces the time someone must have been permanently living in their gender before they can apply from 2 years to only 3 months. Do you see this as potentially problematic, Stephanie? And if so, what might those problems be?
Well, the UK government has already suggested that they may challenge the bill if it is passed by either refusing to recognise the certificates or maybe there's a hint there of a legal challenge. I think the difficulty is that there are lots of powerful voices. It's an emotive topic. And I think what is needed is some sensibility to be drawn into this discussion. And hopefully after the debate continues today, because I understand that due to the lights being on a timer for all good reasons, that the debate had to end in the wee hours of this morning. But hoping that when this debate resumes, that sensibility is brought back into this discussion.
What does that look like, though?
What does it look like? It ensures that safeguards, proper safeguards, are built into this policy to address some of the concerns, the reasonable concerns that are had in this discussion.
So, for instance, just to give you an idea, Jamie Green, the co-chair of Hollywood's LGBT plus group, says that it would mean anyone convicted of a sexual offence who wants to apply for a certificate will need to be fully risk assessed. That's partly the risk, isn't it? That you end up in prisons, you have somebody, as I mentioned before to Olivia, who's committed a crime, but then will say, well, I am now a woman. And then we'll end up in a women's prison. That's the potential complication. Right, anyway, that's just broken this hour, so we will talk about that probably again tomorrow. We have been asking for your poll results on Twitter about whether you'll be changing your behaviour. Bev Turner, that's me, wants to know, due to strikes, will you change your behaviour this Christmas as we're being advised? And it didn't change from the moment we started it. 88% of you have said no. Thank you very much. If you've enjoyed what we've done today, just tell one person, won't you? Say, find GB News, it's good, you like it. Alan Miller, Stephanie Boyce, thank you for your intelligent debates this morning. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. I'm Bev Turner. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10.
Hello, I'm Claire Nazir with your weather update. Brighter skies across England and Wales through this afternoon. Further showers across Scotland and Northern Ireland and the far north of England with a keen breeze here. Low pressure never too far away, delivering those showers with those stronger winds. You can see through Wednesday the legacy of that cloud and rain overnight clearing towards the east, so an improving picture across the extreme east through the next few hours. These showers in the north will be heavy, still gales across the far northwest of Scotland, extending down towards Northern Ireland as well as the far north of England, so some gusty conditions here. Elsewhere, it's bright, it's fine with some sunshine. Temperatures typically 7 to 11 degrees Celsius across England and Wales, lower across Scotland and Northern Ireland, where tonight, under some clearer skies across the east, we could see a touch of frost. Further south, the air turns milder as we see more cloud move in. It's going to turn murky, though, with some fog patches, particularly across southern counties of England. And showers become few and far between across the mainland part of Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland, where you'll see a little bit more cloud to start the day. So quite a murky start and damp across England and Wales as we enter Thursday. Outbreaks of rain will just pulse across these parts, away from Cumbria and Northumberland, where you'll hang out the other side with some brighter skies, joining much of Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, but a cold wind coming in across the far north of Scotland, delivering further showers. Temperatures then typically around average for this time of year in the north, but milder further south, coming around 12 or 13 at the very best. We hang on to that low cloud, that mist, the rain through Thursday evening, slowly clearing away, but more waiting in the wings. It's going to be rather cool across the far north, and again with a touch of frost as we head into the early hours of Friday morning, with that wind still delivering those showers towards the far north. And here's your outlook through the Christmas weekend, remaining changeable with rain or showers as the rain pushes ever northwards.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The